Sean Diddy Combs is getting support from his kids. During the rapper's October 3rd sentencing hearing, several of Combs' children took the stand to advocate for their dad, who is facing years in jail following his July conviction on 2 counts of transportation to engage in prostitution. During their remarks, per NBC News, his 34-year-old son Quincy told Judge Aaron Subramanian that his father is, quote, a changed man.
The courtroom air was thick with disbelief. The verdict had been read, the gavel had struck, and the once mighty Diddy, Sean Diddy Combs, sat frozen, his world crashing down around him. The sentence was brutal, far heavier than anyone in his camp had expected. His team of lawyers, usually the picture of composure, now scrambled in panic. Phones buzzed, papers flew, and the sound of whispers filled the room as his legal team huddled together.
31-year-old Justin went on to add that he hopes his father will get the chance to right this wrong and to be the man he truly is. 27-year-old Christian Combs also asked the judge to give his father grace in his sentencing, adding, "He is the greatest in the world. He is my hero, has always been my hero, and always will be my hero. He always taught me to treat women with respect." NBC News noted that Combs was visibly moved during the statements, putting his head down to cry as his daughter Chance took the stand. The 18-year-old told the court, "We have emptiness in our lives," noting that her father's 13 months in jail have been unexpectedly healing. Combs also has a 2-year-old daughter named Love Sean, and in her speech to the judge, her 18-year-old sibling Delilah stated in part, "Our 2-year-old sister is asking where Dad is, the same way we grew up motherless. It's a hole that can't be filled. We are tired of being strong. We have already lost so much, our mother, our father. Please give us the chance to heal together and move forward together." Combs shares Christian, Quincy, Delilah, and her twin sister Jessie with late ex Kim Porter, who passed away in 2018. While Combs was found guilty on the 2 counts of transportation to engage in prostitution,
Diddy's face was pale, his signature confidence replaced with something raw and unfamiliar, fear. This was not how it was supposed to end, not for Diddy. For decades, he had been the embodiment of power and influence in the entertainment industry, a man who could walk into any room and command attention. But now, his legacy hung in the balance, and every second that ticked by in that courtroom felt like a countdown to total ruin. The judge's sentence had not only stripped him of freedom, it had shattered the illusion of invincibility that had shielded him for years. As the sentence echoed in his mind, Diddy's jaw clenched, his eyes darted toward his lawyer, a man whose face was etched with exhaustion and desperation. "We're filing the appeal," his lawyer whispered, voice trembling. "Immediately." The plan was simple: delay, disrupt, and deflect, but it was also the last resort. The verdict had hit harder than any lawsuit, any scandal, any headline. The prosecution's case had been airtight.
Contend at sentencing that this evidence should be discounted and that what happened was nothing more than a case of willing swingers utilizing the voluntary services of escorts for their mutual pleasure. The government takes the opposite view, that Cassie Ventura and Jane were beaten, coerced, threatened, lied to, and victimized by Combs as a part of their participation in these events. Diddy's federal trial had bombshell testimony seemingly every single day of trial. However, he was still acquitted on 3 of his 5 federal charges. However, that didn't mean his Hollywood peers publicly welcomed him back with open arms. There are some, though, who are supporting him ahead of his sentencing, like his former girlfriend, Caresha Brownlee, better known as Young Miami. She wrote in part, quote, "My name is Caresha Brownlee. I'm a mother, daughter, sister, and a hip-hop artist who has spent many years in the public eye. I want to be clear that I cannot speak on or defend anything that may have happened before I met Sean Combs. I do not condone any wrongdoing. I can only speak from my personal experience and the man I've come to know over the past 4 years. One of my most meaningful memories was when he took me to my first Met Gala. It wasn't just about the event, it was about what it represented. Sean has always made it a priority to open doors for Black people to make it sure we are seen, heard, and valued in spaces where we've historically been excluded. That night reminded me that we belong in every room, at every table, and in every conversation. He's constantly encouraged me and so many others to dream bigger, walk in confidence, and never shrink who we are to make others comfortable. I've also witnessed him doing real inner work. He made the choice to check himself into anger management, start therapy, and commit to physical healing through therapy. That takes strength, humility, and self-awareness. He didn't do it for show. He did it because he wanted to grow and to become a better person. In my personal experience, Sean is not a danger or threat to the community. He is a man of God, someone who uplifts, supports, and inspires those around him to be better mentally, physically, and spiritually. But more than anything, he's a father, and his kids are the ones who look up to him the most. They need him. His presence, love, and guidance matter deeply in their lives. I truly believe that he belongs at home with his family, the people who mean the most to him and who continue to be his greatest source of purpose and strength. Judge, that's a good man. Music producer Dallas Austin wrote in part, "As I have become to know Sean over the years, he has become like a brother to me. I have always seen him as a man of unwavering dedication to his loved ones, his family, especially his mom and children. He is a devoted father whose family always comes first, and the balance he maintains between his personal and professional life is both inspiring and admirable." Former Love and Hip Hop star and music producer Stephen Jordan, aka Stevie J, wrote in part, "Being in this entertainment business for 30 years and being friends with Sean, we've both endured personal challenges with anger and drugs, as I've been going to therapy and taking all the necessary precautions never to look back at addiction again. I'm proud of Sean. I've read in the press that he's clean and sober and also taking anger management therapy to become a better person, because we all fall short as long as we correct ourselves and never revert to our old ways." Now that's just scratching the surface. The defense submitted more than 65 letters of support in favor of Combs to the judge. There are also letters from each of his children, with the exception of his daughter, who's a toddler. However, his youngest daughter's mother, Dana Tran, wrote a letter of support. So did his mom, his sister, the mother of his daughter, Chance, too. So will the judge side with the very man whose motto was once "bad boy for life" come sentencing? Well, his defense team sent the judge nearly 200 pages of reasons why.
Backed by damning testimonies, documents, and years of buried evidence finally dragged into the light, the jury's decision was unanimous, the sentence swift. Diddy's empire, his reputation, his wealth, everything was slipping through his fingers. Outside, the media frenzy was uncontrollable. Cameras flashed, microphones were shoved into faces, and reporters shouted over each other, hungry for reactions. Will Diddy appeal? Is this the end for the music mogul? What does this mean for his companies? The chaos was deafening. Fans and critics alike were glued to their screens, watching the mogul's downfall unfold in real time. Inside, however, it was chaos of a different kind. Diddy's lawyers gathered in the corner of the courtroom, flipping through thick stacks of paperwork. They were already drafting the notice of appeal, combing through every angle that might weaken the judge's ruling. "We'll argue procedural error," one of them muttered, "and we'll challenge the admissibility of the key evidence." They spoke fast, urgent, like surgeons trying to revive a dying patient.
Or rehash all the evidence showing why the government's force, fraud, or coercion arguments at trial were unfounded. Suffice it to say that the jury already weighed the strength of that evidence, and it is not relevant here and should play no role at sentencing. Now, his attorneys argue Diddy and his girlfriends, specifically Cassie and Jane Doe, were all adults when they participated in the Wild King nights or hotel nights or freak-offs. The defense says Combs had serious relationships with those women and were in consensual sexual experiences with adult third parties. And they argue he didn't profit in any way of these hotel nights or freak-offs like a Mann Act defendant typically would. Throughout his trial, drugs were brought up ad nauseum, and this recent court filing was no exception. Diddy's lawyers claim drugs and a high-profile celebrity lifestyle played a role in his conduct. They wrote, "Without minimizing Mr. Combs' conduct, this is in many ways a sex, drugs, and rock and roll story. Mr. Combs had severe substance abuse problems throughout the entirety of the offense conduct and participated in a high-octane celebrity lifestyle. So did Miss Ventura, independently and not because of Mr. Combs. As for Jane, she willingly took ecstasy and other drugs with Mr. Combs, which became a part of their relationship." Now, during trial, the defense seemingly implied what happened in 2016 at the Intercontinental Hotel was due to a bad batch of drugs. But in this new filing, Diddy's defense team says that the Intercontinental Hotel beating of Cassie was a rare time where Combs committed acts of violence during his relationship with Cassie. This despite Cassie herself testifying she couldn't recall how many beatings there were because there were so many. In this recent filing, though, the defense wrote, "The violence was not entirely one-sided. However, Ms. Ventura testified there were times when she initiated physical fights with Mr. Combs. On one occasion, for example, she punched Mr. Combs in the face. Mr. Combs, for his part, is the first to exclaim that these acts of domestic violence against Ms. Ventura are inexcusable. But the notion that the violence or coercion had a nexus to freak-offs is not true, as the jury clearly found." Now, part of the reason the judge kept him behind bars pending sentencing was because he admitted to being physically violent with Jane as recently as June of 2024, 3 months before his arrest. Jane testified she started that physical altercation and admitted to throwing things at him, calling him a pedophile and a monster after punching him in the head. The defense wrote, by that point, Mr. Combs was intoxicated as he had consumed multiple glasses of champagne and multiple shots of tequila. Again, Mr. Combs knows that partaking in any type of physical violence with a woman is inexcusable, but the jury rejected the argument that the violence caused Jane to participate in a hotel night. Throughout the court filing, the Mogul's defense team argues his conviction isn't like other Mann Act cases where the DOJ, for example, limits the prosecutions to cases involving sex trafficking minors or defendants who engage in commercial prostitution enterprises as panderers or call girl operations. They wrote, quote, in other words, only 1% of Mann Act cases we identified involved so-called buyers or Johns. That number alone speaks volumes and corroborates the conclusion that the DOJ does not seek to incarcerate Mann Act defendants who merely purchase prostitution services. During the trial, we learned through testimony what some of the male escorts or entertainers that were hired do during these freak-offs or hotel nights.
He thought of his children, of his empire, of the billions he had once been worth. He thought of the nights he ruled over the music scene, the lavish parties, the luxury that seemed eternal. Now, all of it felt like a memory, fading, distant, gone. He stood up abruptly, ignoring the guards who tried to keep him seated. This isn't over, he muttered under his breath, voice trembling with anger. They can't do this to me. I built this. I am this industry. But the words rang hollow. His power, once undeniable, had been stripped away the moment the judge declared him guilty. Back at his legal headquarters, the energy was frantic. Phones were ringing nonstop. Associates were pulling all-nighters, combing through transcripts, analyzing the judge's statements, searching for even the smallest detail that could be used to overturn the sentence. The appeal filing was more than a legal maneuver, it was survival. Without it, Diddy faced the unthinkable, years behind bars, isolation, and the death of his public image.
Conduct that a jury heard, the jury resolved, and the jury rejected. It is really a sad day for everybody.
I don't feel that way. We are planning to appeal. We think we have strong bases to appeal. The strongest basis is that the jury reached a verdict on coercion. It found there was not coercion, and I think the judge said coercion today as a basis for a sentence at least a dozen times. The jury's verdict was resoundingly clear. There was no sex trafficking, there was no racketeering, everything was consensual, everything was adult, which is why he was convicted only of the prostitution offense. What we feel happened today was that the judge acted as a 13th juror, one that we did not choose, and that he second-guessed the jury's verdict.
Not that these programs are 30 days, but just to say it's going to take long-term and commitment to the long-term results in order for us to really have confidence that he's not going to engage in such disturbing behavior.
And it's interesting, too, because I think the public reaction to this verdict was really kind of split down the middle. I was really thinking it was going to be one way. I was at the courthouse. It was a completely different kind of beast and animal that was going on after the verdict happened. There were people with the baby oil. It was a crazy day after the verdict happened. But I know some analysts were kind of comparing it to the O.J. Simpson verdict, but it seemed like the reaction was really kind of split down the middle. A lot of people upset with the jury's decision, but then there were a lot surprisingly celebrating the verdict. What are your thoughts?
Well, my entire time looking at the case, the charges, and listening, to the evidence as it came in during trial, I thought that depending upon how a person, be it a juror, be it the public, comes into the trial believing how someone who's a victim should act and how they believe relationships can evolve or devolve and fall apart is the lens that they would then make their verdict. Why I say that is because if you think a person who's battered, someone who's been a victim, someone who's been assaulted in the ways that were described, most people have an idea as to how they will respond and act towards that, or their expectation if it happened to their loved one, how they'd expect their loved one to act. And in those situations, you don't expect someone to be tweeting. You don't expect somebody to be sending texts telling their abuser that they love them or that they want more of what took place. However, there are other people who see it from maybe more so the lens of a victim or someone who's been abused, who would say, you know what, that's not so beyond the pale of reason, because the abuse has been so entrenched in this person's mind that they.
The public reaction was merciless. Social media exploded with reactions ranging from disbelief to celebration. Some fans begged for leniency, citing his contributions to music and culture. Others demanded justice, pointing to the long list of allegations that had followed him for decades. Influencers dissected every moment of the trial, while celebrities who once called him a friend fell silent. No one wanted to be associated with a sinking ship. Every major network ran breaking news updates. Headlines blared, "Diddy faces devastating sentence. Lawyers rushed to appeal. Empire on the brink." It wasn't just a legal case anymore, it was a cultural reckoning. The man who had built an empire on charisma and control was now a symbol of collapse and consequence. As the days passed, more details from the courtroom began to emerge. Witness testimonies that had once been sealed were now public. Confidential documents leaked. The public began piecing together the full story. And it wasn't pretty. Allegations that had once been dismissed as rumors now had the weight of evidence behind them.
15-year period. I mean, even if you go back to the superseding indictments where it says this conduct went on from 2009 all the way to 2024, that's a long period of time. And so from the government's perspective, they really just wanted accountability from the defendant, that being Sean Combs. And then they also wanted justice, particularly for the victims. I know when we often talk about the Sean Combs case, the Diddy case, the P. Diddy case, he is the focus of this. But I think a lot of people have to remember that there were victims in this case, that being Cassie Ventura, that being Jane, that also kind of also applying to some of the charges that he was acquitted for too, where you can also bring in like Mia and Capricorn Clark and Deontay Nash. And so I think the government from their perspective was really trying to speak on behalf of all of those people. And so today, Chrissy Slavic, again, she was saying that the law requires the court to know all about the defendant and the defendant's conduct. This isn't just a case about freak-offs and hotel nights. It's about a man who did horrible things to people. He weaponized currency against victims. They were talking about that even though he was convicted just on the Mann Act charges, that it's also kind of in relation to the violence, and that the defendant didn't understand or doesn't understand how harsh his conduct was, and that his respect for the law was just something as simple as lip service. And so, yes, the government was asking for a far steeper penalty and punishment when it came to Sean Combs' sentencing. They were hoping for those double digits, and I think they were kind of opposed to the whole split the baby method, as Christy Slavic said today in court. And so they did want a harsher end of the sentencing today. And I think as far as the judge is concerned and what his ultimate sentence would be, it kind of ended up being a kind of happy medium a little bit.
Yeah, we'll get into that. And the defense, number of defense attorneys spoke. I think almost all of them. You had Xavier Donaldson, you had Brian Steele. What were some of the themes they were focusing on in terms of why Sean Combs deserves a lenient sentence, why 14 months would be appropriate?
Yeah, so right off the bat, Jason Driscoll making the arguments on behalf of the defense, because Jesse, yes, it was Jason Driscoll who spoke. It was Nicole Westmoreland who spoke, Xavier Donaldson who spoke, Mark Agnifilo and Brian Steele. That's 5 of his, 9 defense attorneys who all spoke in court today. So as far as Jason Driscoll is concerned, he was saying that the defense says that Combs didn't make money off of the Mann Act convictions that he was charged. And that was kind of a big theme in terms of his argument today, and that the defense submitted 300 cases of Mann Act cases where it talked about pimps and minors being trafficked, immigrants being transported, homeless people being transported, all of that stuff. And so that was kind of the theme, at least from Jason Driscoll's point of view, and that the defense also saying that Ms. Slavic, Christy Slavic, who is one of the federal prosecutors, blamed Mr. Combs for having a drug addiction for 25 years, something that they were also talking about, how he had been addicted to drugs going back at least to 2000. And so a lot of his conduct might be not necessarily excused because of his drug addiction, but they say that might be kind of the underlying reason. And then when you get to Nicole Westmoreland, she was talking about Sean Combs' inspiration and his commitment at MD.
His inner circle was fracturing. Some loyalists turned on him, offering cooperation to the authorities in exchange for immunity. Meanwhile, inside Diddy's camp, the pressure was suffocating. His legal team worked around the clock, but behind closed doors, even they knew the truth. The chances of winning an appeal were slim. The case had been airtight. Every motion, every objection, Every attempt to discredit the witnesses had failed. The judge's ruling was comprehensive, detailing the evidence with surgical precision. Still, Diddy refused to accept defeat. He called in favors, tried to reach out to old allies, but the lines had gone cold. Executives who once sought his approval now avoided his calls. Brands that once boasted about partnerships quietly erased his name from their websites. The entertainment world that had worshipped him was moving on without him. In one particularly tense moment, caught by paparazzi outside the courthouse, Diddy was seen shouting at his attorney, his face red with rage, his words barely audible but full of fury. "Fix it," he yelled, "do whatever it takes." The clip went viral within hours. It showed a man unraveling, a king without a kingdom, desperately clawing to reclaim control.
Charter schools in the inner city, the fact that he was trying to raise money, the fact that he was getting more black and brown people in order to vote and do their civic duty, all of that sort. And so I think in terms of just what the video was to show is to show that this is who Sean Combs is, but they were also glimpses of what he's like as a dad. And so there were moments where we saw him and his children together, and this was all of his children, going from his oldest child going to his youngest child, that being his daughter Love. And so we really got to see what it was like for him not to be this quote unquote larger than life person, but really to see what he is like as both him during his career and him as a father. And so it was a very humanizing video. It was about 11 minutes long. It was a very interesting glimpse into his life, kind of post all of the civil litigation, the federal case, all of that sort. And so some of the even quotes from it was, let's go, and that means to be positive. And so I think that was kind of the theme of this, was just positivity and just how positive Sean Combs has been to certain people's lives during certain moments of his life.
We got to talk about the big moment. This was the moment we were all waiting for. Sean Combs made a statement. Now, he provided a letter to the court in anticipation of this. It seems like what he said maybe echoed a lot of what he wrote in the letter. He talked about his time in the MDC. He talked about he can't change the past, but he can change the future, that he could be a force for good. He mentioned the victims. He mentioned how sorry he was. This was an important moment, though, because this is the first real opportunity he had since all of this began to substantively address the allegations, to address the charges, to address Jane, to address Cassie. This was his opportunity. He stayed silent the entire trial, as he was supposed to. He didn't take the stand. Talk to us about what he said in court today, and we weren't there. What was his tone like? How were people reacting to this? Because that wasn't captured.
Yeah, so honestly, Jesse, even right from the beginning, it was kind of a dramatic moment in a sense, because right off the bat, when the judge said, "Sean Combs, I'll give you a moment, take however much time you need." And so we're all waiting for him to say the first word. Would he sit down while he's giving his impact statement? Would he stand up? We didn't know what was happening because he really took like a good minute to, I think, kind of compose himself. And then he stood up, he took a deep breath into the mic, which we did hear, which was audible. And he said right off the bat, "I want to thank you for giving me a chance to speak up for myself. It's the hardest thing for me to do was to not speak throughout all of this." He wasn't one to be giving out TV interviews or talking about this case or anything like that. From behind bars, even prior to his incarceration, he didn't do any of that. And so it was interesting to hear, what was he going to say? Was he going to say Cassie Ventura's name? Was he going to say Jane? We didn't know. And so when he said right off the bat, the hardest thing for me to do was not speak. I want to apologize again to Cassie Ventura for any pain that I caused emotionally or physically. I mean, we all kind of know where we were when that Intercontinental Hotel video from 2016 dropped on CNN, and that video was hard to kind of take out of anyone's mind. And so him saying right off at the top of his speech that he apologizes for any pain that he caused to Cassie emotionally or physically, that was kind of the first time we were hearing him say her name in that respect, because even when you go back to the apology video, he didn't say her name.
Behind the scenes, sources close to the case revealed that Diddy's team was preparing to argue that the sentence was excessive and politically motivated, claiming that he was being made an example of because of his fame. But critics weren't buying it. They pointed out that for years, he had used that same fame to escape accountability. Now, they said, justice had finally caught up. The appeal was officially filed days later, a thick document full of legal jargon and impassioned defenses. It cited everything from improper jury conduct to questionable witness credibility. But the truth was simple. Diddy's lawyers were throwing everything they had into the fight because they knew this was the last chance. In the public eye, however, the damage was already done. Diddy's empire was crumbling, his companies were under investigation, his assets being scrutinized, and his public image destroyed. He had gone from being a symbol of success to a cautionary tale. The man who once declared "can't stop, won't stop" was now forced to face the one thing he had spent his life running from: consequences. And in his quietest moments, away from the cameras and the chaos, the reality sank in. No amount of money could change the verdict. No legal team could undo the years of allegations and the mountain of evidence. The empire he built on power, charm, and fear had collapsed, and the world was watching it burn.
He says, "I let down my community. I wanted to show we could take care of our own problems. I got lost. I'm not this bad person. I'm sorry to my community. I let you all down. People can change. I know I've changed." There is a part about this, Joe, and he goes, sometimes you have to go through life experiences. These are not excuses. I can't change the past, but I can change the future. I beg your honor for mercy to be a father again, to be a son again, a leader in my community again, to get the help I need. Now, Joe, look, we're criticizing parts of this from a legal point of view, from a human point of view. Could the judge be persuaded that this is a guy who's really learned his lesson, that could be a force of good, that he wasn't convicted of racketeering and sex trafficking, that while transportation to engage in prostitution is a serious crime, and there were elements of violence and drugs that were a part of it, and this happened many times, that perhaps he should not have to spend a significant portion of his life now in prison?
Here's what I say, at the risk of coming off like I'm banging on Diddy, and this is not a banging, Diddy day kind of thing for me. But if he's learned his lesson in 14 months, he'll learn it better in 2 or 3 years. And so what that means is there's got to be another reason over and above him learning his lesson. That's part of it. But over and above him learning his lesson, for him to be released more sooner than later. And that could be the force of good that he could be. I don't want to minimize that. I don't want to minimize the fact that he's, he's got ingenuity. He's creative. He has a huge platform. Everybody's going to be watching the things that he does next. And so that would have to be more the reason to let him get out earlier, because again, he knows how to succeed. And in all of these areas where he says, because of, he lost his father and it made him more likely to be a domestic abuser or whatever that was, he overcame the odds in so many other ways. So that doesn't fly either. So it's really got to be his ability to do something maybe that almost nobody else could do coming from this situation. So I'm not going to minimize the power of that and how the judge may evaluate that, but it's going to have to be that even more than just learning the lesson.
He just said, "I don't want to let God down. I have no one to blame but myself. I know I will never put my hands on another person again. I'm willing to comply with any conditions. Me sharing my story is not a scheme to get less time. This story is tragic. If Your Honor gives me a chance to share my story, this has a positive impact."
As the appeal process began, the stakes couldn't be higher. The outcome would determine not just his freedom, but his legacy. If the appeal failed, Diddy would spend years behind bars, his empire dismantled piece by piece. If it somehow succeeded, he might salvage a fragment of the life he once had, but the stains on his name would never wash away. For now, all he could do was wait. Wait for the court's decision. Wait for the public to move on. Wait for a miracle that might never come. Because this time, the music mogul who once controlled everything was powerless. His fate now rested in the hands of a system he had always believed he could outsmart. And as his lawyers rushed to file every motion they could, one truth echoed through the halls of the courthouse: the king of hip-hop's empire had fallen, and no appeal could erase that. This was the end of an era. The curtain had fallen, and Diddy, once the master of his own world, was now just another man waiting for judgment.